Hello and welcome back to Let's Improv a Story, a podcast where I desperately try not to say the title as Let's Improv a Podcast. But speaking of that, that's what we're going to do. We're going to improv live and on air in real time an idea for a story. Not one that's fanfic. Fanfic's wonderful. Wonderful! But one that, in theory could have been made or be published by a book publisher, comic book publisher, or greenlit by a studio, etc., etc. So, today, we are going to tackle a story that could have been made. We are going to make a story for a hypothetical Star Wars 1986 film. So, the premise here is what movie would have been made, I guess, produced and guided by George Lucas, if he had wanted to continue making Star Wars movies after Return of the Jedi. He obviously took like a 17-year break, basically, or maybe shorter if you want to count when he started writing the prequels. But if he just kept going, his initial idea was that he'd make like 12 of them, and he'd direct the first one and the last one, and he would have his friends direct the ones in between. Now, he started this idea. He obviously directed the first one, and then he had his USC teacher, Irvin Kershner, direct The Empire Strikes Back. And the initial story treatment of The Empire Strikes Back was, Vader was still like a henchman and a bad guy and not Luke's father. And he had the screenwriter, Lee Brackett. She wrote the script, which she tragically passed away. After she passed away, Lucas looked at the script and decided it wasn't working out dramatically, and then he made the fateful choice for the franchise to merge the two characters. One, General Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, Luke's dad, was merged with henchman Darth Vader to become Luke's dad, Darth Vader, Daddy Vader. From that point on, the entire structure and narrative changes. It's no longer like based on these Weekly Republic serials from ye old days that he would watch when he was growing up. It's now, a proper, sort of family space opera saga. And you can't really crank out 12 of them because you need to deal with all of these dramatic and character arcs that are now, in play and immediate and emotionally powerful and that you want to resolve. And simultaneously, he almost had like a heart attack making the first one, A New Hope, and then he made The Empire Strikes Back as an independent movie, which he made all of his Star Wars movies as an independent movie, self-financing them. He just went and got the bank loan and put, I guess, the sequel rights up and maybe the merchandise rights up or whatever as collateral for the loan. So Empire is, it's an expensive movie, and it's his money, and it has to be a success or it all goes downhill. It all goes down the drain. And that's stressful for him. And then finally, during the Return of the Jedi time, when he wants to wrap it up, his marriage falls apart. And so he's in no mood to keep making Star Wars movies, and they were so exhaustive personally and physically and and stressful financially as he's putting up the money each time. And plus he'd made the dramatic decision to combine those two characters, which leads to all the Luke and Vader and redemption, father-son stuff that climaxes in the end of the third act of Return of the Jedi. So, the original 12-movie plan, it's a adventure serial, bring in your friends, you do this one, you do that one, and I'll do the 12th one. That went out the window when he made that decision. But, he could have, while making Return of the Jedi, or his marriage falling apart or whatever, decided to, that, he wanted to keep making more. It could have happened very easily. Maybe it would have taken a year off and it would have been 4 years later. But let's say he just kept wanting to make them. And it, seems like a nice enough guy. He wanted to spend time with his kids and all that stuff and take a break from 10 years of making Star Wars. and produce things instead. I don't fault him for it, certainly. But if he wanted to keep making them, and he made a Star Wars movie 3 years after 1983's Return of the Jedi, a Star Wars 1986 titled Who Knows What, TBD, what would it have been? Because when he sold Lucasfilm to Disney, part of his pitch was that he had treatments for sequels for 7, 8, and 9. Now, again, I like George Lucas a lot, but whenever he says he's written something, always round down. He certainly did not have a script, and he had the overarching ideas for what to do, and I think those are informative for what he might have done in a 1986 Star Wars. Now, a 1986 Star Wars could have been reminiscent of a lot of what he did partially in The Phantom Menace, which was just kind of do things he'd always wanted to do. He originally based the plot of A New Hope off of Akira Kurosawa's I'm going to blank on it. The Hidden Fortress, where I believe two samurai escort a princess from a fallen kingdom to some safe refuge or wherever, and they're accompanied by two kind of comedic characters. The comedic characters remained in the bickering comedic characters remained in 3PO and R2, but the general plot structure kept evolving as he kept making revisions and new drafts of A New Hope, and eventually didn't really resemble Hidden Fortress. But Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Padme's situation in The Phantom Menace very much is two samurai Jedi Knights escorting a princess, / queen, to safety. And, he also had the pod race. Here's someone who, had made American Graffiti, loved racing cars, all those things. There's a lot in The Phantom Menace where he's like, this is a freebie. I can just do fun things I want. And he's also building up the Jedi Order and the Council and Coruscant and the Senate and Palpatine's plot, and all these things are being seeded, but none to really, pay off or be relevant within The Phantom Menace. So I really do think he looked at that movie kind of as like a freebie, let's just play around in the Star Wars universe, which is something he eventually kind of did as he oversaw, I guess 2 days a week, the making of the Clone Wars show. It's like, hey, I love this place. He once called it, as he contemplated at some point in between Jedi and Phantom Menace, he had a quote, a very endearing quote, where he said that, of course I want to go back one day to the Star Wars universe. It's like a home for me. I have a lot of friends there. And those words, home, friends, are, very simple, powerful, universal words, and he means them that way. And that is, for anyone who's ever created something that they love, a place they love being in, imaginarily, I guess, or whatever, and characters they love hanging out with, that really resonates. And for those of you who've loved, Star Wars is one of them. You certainly love the Star Wars universe, or Han, Luke, and Leia, and Lando, and Yoda, and everyone, and care deeply about those characters and want to hang out with them more. Especially when, I think many people at the end of Return of the Jedi are like, oh, it's over. We're leaving this place, and we're saying goodbye to these people. This also is a very powerful sensation I think we all get at the end of a TV show's run. So, and Lucas feels that about his creations, and that's incredibly endearing. Let's see if I can get back on track. But yeah, a freebie. So there's a very good chance that after all the climaxes and weight and drama at the end of the Return of the Jedi, he would view, well, if I'm just going to keep making more, I'll just do a freebie. Star Wars 1986 will be just a grab bag of fun things and just a rollicking adventure. Though I do think that part of him kind of got satisfied with the Indiana Jones movies. Raiders really is his anthropological interests plus his adventure serial interests and just fun hijinks and set pieces interests all thrown together. And, his desire to make a sort of James Bond-like character and film series. And of course, and again, he always throws personal stuff into things. It's funny because he's an intelligent man, a very interesting guy, but he speaks in monotone, and he doesn't always seem, like he has feelings. He very much does. And his movies, he always needs help to get the feelings to come out of them. And the less help he has, like in The Phantom Menace in particular, the less feelings are communicated to the audience, and the less the audience resonates with them. I often view The Phantom Menace as, kind of a giant, like you've built up a giant set of logs and tinder and stuff for a humongous bonfire, and like you just can't get the spark to ignite it. The dramatic spark just can't get there. And now he had, his wife, he had Kurtz, he had Kasdan, he had Kirshner, all these names of people who worked in the original trilogy. I believe the HUYCK, the Hux writing team worked on the first film too. He had a lot of people there to make sure that all the things he built, that big bonfire he built for the original trilogy, did catch a dramatic spark and ignite consistently. And obviously throughout all 6 of his movies, he had John Williams, so that always worked. And there are plenty of times in the prequels where, because so many other people who would help, make that dramatic connection, because Lucas is doing all the other things. The world is built, the themes are there, the sort of film references are there, the combination of different ideas, the visual thematic stuff is all there, the designs are incredible in there, it's all there. The structure's there, the character arcs are there, and often very clear. And, as a guy who can make or oversee the creation of all these things, but just, it's that dramatic bit. And so that is what it is. And those people weren't as around in the prequels. And a lot of times where the drama and the feelings and the emotion are almost just solely being carried by John Williams in the prequel series. But all that other stuff is still there. It's all still there. I mean, there are incredible designs, incredible sound and music, incredible thematics, incredible, the character arcs are very strong and epic, and it's all there. The world building, the different ideas, whether historical or anthropological, the visual thematics he's extraordinary at, it's all there. But, if you don't make that dramatic connection, it won't work. And, it will leave people cold, many people cold. So, that aside, that incredible digression aside, I think for this, we should not do a freebie. I think that is more, I think Lucas, even if he tried to make a Star Wars 1986, I don't think he would just do that, because even The Phantom Menace isn't just doing that. He didn't have as much sort of epic or dramatic story to tell in The Phantom Menace, but he did check all the check boxes to build the foundation for what leads into Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, etc. It all starts there. It's all clearly there. Now, and let's assume that the Indiana Jones trilogy, or just movies, satisfy his desire to just, have sort of have a fun time at the movies and have a fun time creating movies. So he would still want to do something, I think, more serious. And he has there's a lot of stuff I'll take from the Paul Duncan Star Wars Archives books, because there's a lot of good Lucas interviews in there. And he mentions in there, I think it's that one and not Rinsler, I think it's Paul Duncan, where he says that, Indiana Jones, there's no real deeper meaning there. It's fun. It's a good time. But Star Wars is his onion. It's the many-layered creation and piece of artistry. So if he were to make a Star Wars movie, feature film, 3 years after Return of the Jedi, Star Wars 1986, what would he do? And let's say, we were hired as screenwriters to help him out. Something he certainly did. He was very happy to have Larry Kasdan. He bumped into him at the airport prior to Phantom Menace, was like, hey, you want to take a crack at this? And Larry, an interesting guy who doesn't just want to be a Star Wars guy, and maybe he was busy or whatever, declined. And, so Lucas brought in I think one of his Indiana Jones Chronicles screenwriters for Attack of the Clones, and then playwright Tom Stoppard to help with Revenge of the Sith. And, and the dramatics in those movies improve. The Attack of the Clones dramatics are actually quite... the character emotions and desires and feelings are very strong, but they're extraordinarily on the nose and earnest. Which they are quite frequently in the original trilogy, but there's more just smoothing out of everything. And then, in Revenge of the Sith, they're closer to what you'd want, decent to good, to oftentimes really good dialogue to be. And there are a number of lines in the Revenge of the Sith that are quite powerful. I mean, none more so than the Obi-Wan speech at the end to Anakin in their last meeting. But that's neither here nor there. What would George Lucas do in a 1986 Star Wars movie? And what would we help him or work with him to create? Because you're obviously left with the plot threads of Return of the Jedi, which, again, is the end of a trilogy or a 6-film saga. And, certain people are alive, certain people are dead, certain plot lines are completely wrapped up, some are mostly, and some are still out there. So, and you also have the thing where, we talked earlier about Lucas making sequel trilogy treatments for the Disney sale, but with those treatments, he's clearly making them with the mind that 30 years has passed, because he, before the sale, talked to Harrison and Mark and Carrie about coming back and got them to sort of sign on, at least tentatively. And, their ages dictate the time span between an episode 6 and 7. But if it's 1986, only 3 years has passed. And in that case, you have a different situation where you're trying to figure out which of your actors want to come back. Because I don't think Harrison Ford, who wanted to die in Return of the Jedi, and I think Lucas rightly said, hey, when I was a kid and characters died, I got real sad. And I think he rightly nixed that idea. Mark Hamill says, hey, this is great. I'm finally a Jedi. Now I get to be a Jedi in these movies. And then there were no more movies. So I think Hamill would be happy to come back and be Luke Skywalker, full Jedi Knight. I don't think Harrison Ford would come back for more than basically a cameo or a scene or something, or not at all. Carrie Fisher, I don't know. I think she'd be okay being involved somewhat, but I just loosely feel like as her career went, in other directions and writing, et cetera, and even, she sort of famously had personal issues with addiction and a struggle there. I'm not sure how involved she would be. I assume, my understanding of Billy D. Williams' career, I know he's is that, he was never the top of the ticket item on a lot of movies, and in theory would be happy to come back. I don't know that for sure. But, Anthony Daniels always seems like he's up for more, and Kenny Baker as R2. So there are certainly characters who would be there, and I could see, I'm not sure a Lando would be in the first one, especially if you're plotting out 3. But I think it's more important to first look at the storylines you can continue or create. Because obviously, at the end of Return of the Jedi, the Empire falls, and they want to create a new republic and, restart the Jedi Order and, clean up whatever's left of the Empire, which there seems to be a lot of stormtroopers and Star Destroyers, etc. And if you look at what Lucas talks about in the Paul Duncan Star Wars Archives books about his general arc for the sequel trilogy he was creating before the Disney sale, and for the Disney sale as well, to increase the value, it goes from a number of things. He talks about, taking inspiration from the post-Iraq war from 2003, and how, in the power vacuum after the fall of Saddam's government, you have all these groups popping up, some of them from the government, some from its intelligence or military services, some from other places or other countries, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all vying for control, they're all doing a lot of things, and they're causing a lot of chaos with each other, with the victors, with everyone. And that would be sort of his template for a beginning of the state of the galaxy in a sequel to The Return of the Jedi, and he mentioned things like, stormtrooper planets and sort of Imperial warlord kind of situations. But from there, he moves on to, because he brought Darth Maul, famously seemingly killed in The Phantom Menace, he brought him back in his Clone Wars show, and then moved Darth Maul into a sort of underworld, crime lord kind of situation. He would have Darth Maul, an old one, and, from a sequel trilogy point, Maul's there at the beginning and the end, and that makes some sense. But you have Darth Maul running the criminal underworld, trying to subvert and corrupt this fledgling New Republic, and I guess sort of get control of it. And he had, I guess, Darth Talon from one of the, the Star Wars Expanded Universe things, the red Twi'lek, however you pronounce it. Dark Jedi as the sort of the heavy, as the Darth Vader role, the chief henchman. Now, so you'd be dealing with like stormtrooper planets, or just sort of like, hanger-on warlords who, from a fractured and defeated Imperial Empire, and then you'd move on maybe in the second film to dealing with these criminal underworld mafia-like Darth Maul-led elements, and maybe in the third one they all combine to try to get control of the New Republic and are defeated or whatever. And they're probably defeated with the help, especially in the third one, of a new Jedi Order, which Lucas also had the ideas twofold. One, I think he had Luke more removed from the New Republic because Luke, and the prequel trilogy reflects this, Luke would have the opinion that the Jedi Order of the prequel era, the sort of late galactic era, that they were too tied into the government. They're these force wielder, monk-like types who are supposed to be mindful of not just the cosmic, but the living force, these two parts of the force. Life creates the living force, and then it moves into the cosmic force, and there's sort of a symbiotic circle. And symbiotic circles are a big thing for Lucas, and we'll come back to that in a second. But a symbiotic circle where the large impacts and influences the small, and the small influences the large. The original Star Wars has the large empire is impacting the people who are not very powerful, but yet the people who are not very powerful, including just a farm boy from nowhere, can blow up the large Death Star, et cetera, and that goes around and around. But so the Jedi part of a sequel trilogy for him seemed to be, in large part, Luke pulls himself away and the Jedi Order away from just doing what is good for the New Republic. That is not always what's best for the Force or the galaxy, and that those two things are not the same. And, again, this is because the Jedi in the prequel trilogy are very clearly, and it's kind of it's not like a trick exactly, but it's part of the plot and the downfall. When you're viewing the prequel trilogy, you're very excited to see the Jedi and they're full power and all that stuff, and they're, there's the whole order there in the council, but they're also basically 10 years from the end of this, for 1,000 generations, blah blah blah. They're right in the last decade. They're falling apart, really. They're over, they're too bureaucratic or sclerotic or too afraid. They quite often talk about essentially fear. And they seem to be governed by it in many cases. Anyway, they are too tied to the government. They're and it's blinded them. They are, they do sort of the Galactic Republic's bidding. They don't live, vis-a-vis the living force in some sort of organic environment of any kind. They are in a big temple in a megalopolis city planet, and their council is literally at the top of an ivory tower, removed from everyone else. A sort of literal ivory tower with elites at the top. So, and that leads to their fall. The Emperor's under their nose for a decade, they can't tell. And Luke does not want to repeat that. Also they're incredibly strict about things. Anakin at age whatever it is, 6, is too old to be trained. And they also, besides that, that whole attachment thing that they're incredibly strict about, all those things that they seem to be overly strict about, and more rule followers and political actors than sort of will of the Force, mind the living Force, what is the flow of the Force, all these things, kind of like, where is life taking us? Let's use our judgment and our, Force sensitivity to find the right path and not just follow the rules. If you're a Jedi, rule following isn't really your thing. You have extra senses that connect you to the present state of the galaxy. You don't need rules so much as you need to be attuned to, the balance and imbalance and the direction and will of the Force. Rules in many ways are lessons from the past, but if you have an actual connection to what is wrong in the present, then you just need to use your judgment. So anyway, Luke doesn't want to do that, so he would remove himself remove the Jedi Order from the New Republic and not just do what they want and not be located on Coruscant or wherever their headquarters would be, their capital. And he would instead train a Jedi Order out there. Another element that Lucas wanted to deal with, and I think this is mostly the last one, and he certainly did want to get to a next generation of Jedi or, the family or whatever, but you're not going to do that in a 1986 Star Wars movie. The last element he talked about was sort of another symbiotic relationship between, higher organisms like human beings and microbiotic or single-celled organisms. And he always had this idea of, back from when Star Wars was called the Journal of the Wills, Whills, this idea of the wills, which he seems to have either always had this as what they were, or he created it along the way, an idea that the wills are single-celled organisms, which, as we know, can exist anywhere, including on an asteroid in outer space. They can be tough enough to survive that environment, and that's part of the sort of panspermia theory, where an asteroid with microbes on it crashes into a planet and seeds it with life. That life can come from, other life in outer space, basically, which is an interesting theory. And so, okay, he has the wills, which he says in this Paul Duncan interview, that they are single-celled organisms spread across the galaxy, and, this clearly is related to the will of the Force, etc., the WILL of the Force. And these single-celled organisms, the wills, he says, use the midichlorians to influence others, and they also, I swear I read this, every time I see it I feel like I've misread it, but maybe don't quote me on it, but that the wills eat the Force, and that the wills can be good and bad, and therefore throw the Force into balance or imbalance in relation to that. And it's interesting that the idea that there even like a single-celled organism can use the dark side, I guess, which is fascinating. And Lucas's idea for balance of the Force generally seems to be no dark side. If there's dark side, the Force is out of balance. That generally seems to be what he says. He will sometimes say light side, dark side, as if it's like, two sides of a scale, but he does not ever operate Star Wars in such a way where it's like, oh, if there's 10 Jedi over here, you got to have 10 Sith over here, otherwise everything's out of balance. It's not like that. To him, it's, the correct balance of self-sacrifice and caring and discipline, etc., and the correct balance of, the universe and life in it operating in the correct way. Not too much life, not too much destruction, etc. So these wills would then, he talks about how his sequel trilogy would go into the microbiotic, these wills, the microbiotic, and which you hear that and you want to make a joke like the 80s movie Interspace, where it's like, what, they're going to shrink down the Millennium Falcon and like inject it into someone's bloodstream and, I don't know. Oh no, look, it's a single-celled organism. Zap it with the quad lasers. I got it. Don't get cocky. But I guess, and it all depends about execution. We talked earlier about the midichlorian scenes in the prequels, where in The Phantom Menace, the midichlorians are talked about by Qui-Gon and Anakin, and it's like a really it's a scene that leaves you disquieted. But they're then talked about by Anakin and Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith at the Opera House, and it's a really cool scene. So that stuff comes down to execution. I don't know how much it would really be involved in the real, true plot mechanics of the movie or the sequel trilogy. But you've got these things that he would use, and I think would be ideas he would be using not just in, the future, but in 1986. Luke, you've got to clean up the end of the Empire and the Imperial remnants. You've got to deal with whatever comes up in its way, crime lords, etc. There may also be dark force users who pop up. And even though like a Darth Maul or a Darth Talon had not been invented yet or created yet, so it'd be something else. And, Luke trying to learn from the past. I don't know how much of the sort of, not disdain, but how much of the flaws of the Jedi Order Lucas had in mind in, making the original trilogy. But still, Luke would try to rebuild the Jedi Order. And so the remnants, the Imperial remnant, the underworld, crime lords, etc., and Luke trying to rebuild the Jedi Order are certainly things that would be, I think, top of mind for a Episode 7 in 1986, a Star Wars 1986. Now, where you go from there, and again, you probably don't have Harrison, and you probably don't have much of Carrie Fisher, though you may be able to get enough of her to have her do some scenes leading the rebellion is turning into a government or whatever, And I don't know, there are all kinds of ways you can go with this. I mean, obviously, you can have, if you're just fighting Imperials, this is where you get into problems of like, are we just repeating things? And certainly a movie following Luke as he, I guess, tries to wrap up dealing with the Imperials. I don't know. It is tough. Like, especially, it's a little easier when decades have passed and you're dealing with them then, because you really do seem like you have to deal with the aftermath of things, which is not very exciting after the conclusion of this huge epic original trilogy. So you really need to be launching into something else. And I don't know, you try to deal with like, how do you incorporate these elements, these crime lord elements and Imperial remnant elements, like if they are like majorly influential or have lots of systems or whatever, you would eventually need to bring them into the New Republic. You need to find ways to like win allies in those situations. You do get into the sort of like, nitty gritty of building political coalitions, which is not generally extremely exciting filmmaking. I know you can get you can get movies where you like recruit a team and that can be fun, but that's generally like a montage or like at most like an act of the movie. So it is tough. You need to find, is there more to the sort of family saga that can be done? I guess you could do something like it's 10 years in the future. It doesn't have to be 3 years in linear time. You could certainly, if you just did like a 10-year jump within the Star Wars timeline from the end of Return of the Jedi, you can get a decent little reset going. And, you could have, 10-year-old kids going along with Luke or something like that. Han and Leia's kids could be with him. That would get you something to work with. And, Luke could have a few sort of, he could have a small Jedi Order, like a sort of shaky, loose one, kind of a team. And there could be different, perspectives within that team about how to handle things, how to deal with, this last Imperial remnant or whatever. And maybe there's sort of like the end of the first movie is kind of like a battle of the Bulge against the Empire. And, you within this like little Jedi team of Luke's, there could be a debate on, younger members versus maybe older ones who might remember the before the Empire times. A debate on how the Jedi Order should work, how it should be related to the New Republic, how it should relate to each other. Can they get, married and have kids, or can they just have romances but not be attached? And if there's a child, the Jedi Order raises it, etc. These issues can be brought up, but you'll note in Star Wars, you can certainly see lots of issues and historical issues and thematic issues, etc., whether dealt with right up front, or if they're in the background, or through symbolism, etc. They're there all the time, but it does not dwell on those things. I mean, it doesn't dwell on much. On much. Obi-Wan dies, and Luke's sad for like 11 seconds, and then he's like, "Woohoo! I blew up a TIE fighter." Like, Star Wars does not dwell on those things. It acknowledges them, and they're incorporated, but it is it is the sort of genre of an adventure. So how you take these things, and you think of like the stuff that Lucas was talking about for the sequel trilogy. I mean, again, the post-Iraq War aftermath in 2003, the sort of almost like gut biome microbiotic influence on higher beings with the wills, etc. The Jedi Order and its relationship to the center of government and how those intermix and influence each other, or should they, shouldn't they? All these things are not ideas that immediately bring like an action set piece to mind. Overthrowing an empire, a galactic civil war, the sort of backdrops of the original trilogy and the prequels, those do. It's like, oh, I can see, big, exciting action set pieces and such happening within those frameworks. But rebuilding something is different. And you also got to look at like the original trilogy is a large force, the Empire, versus a smaller one, the Rebels. The prequel trilogy is sort of two semi-equal sized forces in a sort of galactic civil war. There isn't really like a kind of galaxy-spanning warlike paradigm that you can go to. I mean, generally two equal forces or one underdog force versus a larger force are kind of what you do. Now, I guess given the chaos of the galaxy and the power vacuum after the fall of the Empire, many different groups operating with and against each other, depending on the moment or the opportunity, that may be the way you go. So instead of large versus small, or equal size versus equal size, you have many different sides against each other. You've got, a couple Imperial remnant ones. You've got, a couple crime lords, maybe a separate group of systems that want to form their own government that, would be under maybe, I don't know, like a benevolent dictator type or something, the good emperor, and not the democratic, small d democratic democracy of the New Republic. So, I mean, yeah, there's somewhere to go there. And within that, you have Luke trying to navigate raising a new Jedi Order properly while also protecting the New Republic when it needs to be protected. And I mean, it would be an interesting scene where Leia asks him for help and he declines because he doesn't think that it's the Force is leading him elsewhere and doesn't lead him to believe that that's the right course of action. Or even, which I guess this would be maybe like a second movie, which would be Luke, maybe not against exactly, but acting contrary to what the New Republic is doing. If the New Republic is, I don't know, let's see, there's sort of maybe like a underhanded ruler of a planet or something, and the New Republic thinks that they are working with whatever kind of dark Jedi Darth Maul-esque person or Imperial remnant is out there. But Luke thinks they could be brought over to the, good side of governance in the galaxy, and actually, I don't know, sneakily works behind Leia and the New Republic's forces to get this person on their side, or even sabotages. I mean, you can't have them outright like fighting New Republic troops and stuff like that, but sabotages them in order to make an ally out of this planetary ruler or whatever. Like that might work. But again, you've got to build up the family dynamic, and there is an element of like, oh, does so-and-so fall to the dark side, and do they get redeemed? And it's like, are we going to do this every time? I don't feel like we need to do that. People can still have human emotions. They can fail and not turn to the dark side. And even maybe not bringing in, I mean, it's hard to not bring in a dark side character, and Lucas certainly was doing that in his sequel trilogy treatments. And where they come from, I mean, they're just going to spring out of nowhere. I don't think he had the Darth Plagueis the Wise idea, and the idea of, the sort of fan favorite idea of like, he survived. There he is. I don't think Lucas had that idea yet. It's not a bad idea that, like, hey, I've been biding my time, etc. Here I am, the guy who started it all, who trained Palpatine, who created Anakin, etc., and had very long plans and from a long-lived race of beings or whatever to, control the galaxy through the dark side, is not the worst idea for a villain in the end of all this. Lucas in the Clone Wars also brings in this, like, the Mortis arc and the ones, or these incredible Force users. And, there's an element there that would be brought up with ideas of, like, maybe that could be used as a future antagonist or whatever, like the dark side son or whatever. But those are sort of highly symbolic and very unique, bespoke beings in the Star Wars, and are probably not very useful to utilize. They're also so powerful, they're kind of overpowered. They're better, I think, as essentially teachers through their actions of what Lucas believes the Force can be, or how he can test it and how to use it, as opposed to being actual sort of on-the-ground antagonists. So again, I guess as we look at, like, a Star Wars 1986, we're left trying to find something for that movie to do. And, despite all the things around Star Wars, you take A New Hope, and it is a farm boy who wants to get out and see the galaxy. He wants to have an impact, make a difference, do the right thing. And what does that mean for a Star Wars 1986? I think you have to deal with where the characters are. And I think it's hard to not follow, at least in this movie, the character of Luke. By the time you get to the, 3 years later, if Han and Leia's kids are Force sensitive and with Luke and being trained by Luke and with him on his adventures, by the time you get to the second one, you can certainly have them be more of the focus, and they can have their own failures in the second act where people fail, before everyone is, saves the day in the third act and reach their proper sort of dramatic arcs. I think the first one you really have to deal with Luke dealing with his situation, because he has come a long way from being, that farm boy. And I think he has a lot to, he kind of followed a pretty linear path. It wasn't so difficult, your foster parents, your aunt and uncle are killed by the Empire. You leave with this mentor who's right there. You are then part of the rebellion. You go on to train yourself in these Force powers you have, followed by you can learn that your dad is the chief, one of the chief evil ones. You've got to confront him. You've got to follow your Force power destiny and your sort of rebellion destiny, which is overthrowing the Emperor and redeeming your father. All those things. It all kind of like, it's almost on rails. It's all right there. I mean, you could ignore it, but he continues to he'll have setbacks, but he'll keep going towards doing the right thing. And he would do that in a sequel trilogy also in a 1986 film. But all that stuff is sort of left. Now he is the establishment. Now he is Obi-Wan. He is Yoda. He is Darth Vader. He is the most prominent, Jedi out in the field for the largest government in the galaxy. He's assumed all these roles, and that is a lot. But that becomes a more internal, character-focused kind of story. And that's not, impossible. But his predicament is also, he's no longer like a relatable farm boy, right? Or even like a young man who's a soldier is being trained in the Force and stuff, or someone confronting their father who they disagree with. These are all very relatable things. That's his arc in those three movies. What his arc is as a teacher, as a sort of parent figure to his niece and nephew, if they are the characters that go with him, what his responsibilities are, like, these are different things, and how you become, and these are later in life things, sort of midlife things. How do I essentially raise these two kids? How do I what are my responsibilities to what's around me? How do I build something? It's like, do you make this almost like a small business story with Luke building a new Jedi Order? And then again, how do you dramatize that and bring it to the forefront in what is supposed to be a sort of action adventure space fantasy? These are difficult questions, and let's improv a story. It is not easy to improv this story. You can come up with elements for it, but like a character arc for Luke is difficult given all the arcing he's already done. I mean, to a degree, has he just arrived as a character and he is there and he's a sort of fixture? Certain people become themselves and they are themselves for the rest of their life. And when they go through things, they go through it as themselves. They don't really change. They are the person they will become or want to become. They can improve, they can get experience, they can avoid certain, pitfalls. And that may be where Luke is. And he just is himself. And to be honest, as a fan, I would just want to hang out with Luke Skywalker some more. And I'm happy for him to just be that guy. So then you need to put the character arcs somewhere else. There can be Jedi with him who, having a bunch of new Jedi running around in a new Jedi Order, having an impact on the galaxy sounds like, you think of like a sort of Silicon Valley startup where a bunch of young people have a lot of power over a lot of different areas. And, this may be the actual way to go. You've got Luke essentially, working with them, but you need to focus on a younger set of Jedi. Some he's found, I guess. And, maybe 2 or 3. And you can have a more, I guess the kid part of the movie, which kind of goes through R2 and 3PO, and to a degree Luke and Leia in A New Hope, and goes through Anakin and like Jar Jar, basically, in The Phantom Menace. If you have 2 10-year-olds running along, they can essentially be along for the ride. And the humor can come from them like it did from R2 and 3PO. And was sort of all put on Jar Jar, maybe too much, in The Phantom Menace. But the humor and the kid accessibility for Star Wars can come to those 2 characters. And they can really just, you strengthen their dynamic, and not exactly like R2 and 3PO, but you have a good, strong dynamic between the 2 kids. But they'll be locked in as they are as characters. And they are the kid's viewpoint, and they're also the sort of, more humorous aspect of things too. Not like, and we've all seen the kid stuff can be funny and it can be, too much. So, it's a balancing act, whatever. You probably need to have other older, teen, 20-something Jedi that Luke is training. Maybe literally just another boy and girl, which can sort of be played off of with the 2 kids as they keep looking up as like, are these models? Are they doing, are these models for my behavior? Should I be like this person? Or should I do what Luke says, etc. And so, and they can be also, they don't have to be human, probably should be, just for relatability for the audience. But it's, universal aliens, but generally the main characters tend to be human. Even in the prequels. I mean, other than Yoda, I'm not really coming up with a lot of, high screen time main characters, and none really come to mind. So that means you're bringing in, 2 other young characters, and they have an arc, and they probably need to be on opposite sides to have conflict of one trying to be, how do you use the Force? I mean, the Force is obviously a tool for violence. A lot of, pushing and Force chokes and lightsabering, etc. It's also very much a, you can manipulate people's minds. You can try to sort of, not really game the universe, but follow the path of, the will of the Force, etc. So that's, you could have a manipulator and sort of a more violent one, etc. Not like in a bad way, but also kind of in a bad way. If you overuse the Force to determine what people will do, these are not the droids you're looking for. You don't want to use death sticks, then, that gets pretty into a real sort of a gray area, or just more nefarious area. And also if you overdo, lightsaber chopping, you're going too far as well. But that's probably not what you want to lean on. That's too immediate for, just like, oh, for how you use the Force and an idea of like what it should be used, how it should be used in a new Jedi Order. It needs to be more, do you lay back and wait? Do you, jump in and take action and take charge? I think more along the lines of like, hey, I'm a Jedi and I know what's going on and I can sense the Force and we're going to do this and I know what's right. I'm going to solve your problem, versus someone else who's like, let's be patient and let's kind of see where things go. Maybe we can just sort of tweak things here and there and like give a little nudge this way. And that's a different way of looking at how the Jedi Order should behave. I mean, if there are Imperial remnant troops charging down at some innocents or whatever, you need to jump in and, take charge. If there's sort of a political situation that's, unclear and dynamic and in flux, you may want to sort of hang back and talk to people and give a little nudge in the sort of moral direction and try to figure out, maybe I can get these two to like talk and that'll work out. And, and that would probably be how you want to build the character arcs and the conflict between the two teen or 20-something young Jedi characters. So you then need, they have to have, they also, need to have a straight up sort of want. They want to be X, Y, or Z. But if you build that, you're literalizing, of course, you're personifying Luke's internal dilemma of how a new Jedi Order should operate in the galaxy post Return of the Jedi, post, the sclerotic, overly bureaucratic and afraid Jedi Order of the late Galactic Republic. That means that, as you go through, I guess, in the first movie dealing with the Imperial Remnant or whatever, and maybe some, crime lord elements, that you have these two characters as not a sort of angel and a devil on Luke's shoulders, and certainly they'd be sent off on their own tasks, but just the two ways you can go. The classic, original series of Star Trek. You've got Kirk in the middle, and you've got hyper-logical Spock on one shoulder, and hyper, heartfelt, emotion-focused Dr. McCoy on the other shoulder, and Kirk is in between those, and is often shows great emotion and great logic and great balance between the two. And you would sort of do that with these two characters, with Luke, but also just in the story, and in the audience's mind too, as they try to figure out like, well, what are they supposed to do? What is the right way through this? And you're still missing. Obviously, you're missing a villain. And the villain of the original Star Wars, A New Hope, is essentially Tarkin, who is, a completely one-note villain. And again, that movie has, like 2.5 character arcs. Like Luke, does Luke have a character arc in that movie? He keeps encountering obstacles and overcoming them. Han Solo has a character arc, going from, essentially smuggler, mercenary, caring about money, to caring about his friends and people and being a hero. Luke, does say like, oh, I got to stay here and help with the moisture harvest and stuff. But, he wants to leave and he would love to be trained as a Jedi. And, he has to keep surmounting challenges as he's thrown into these environments. And as the audience surrogate in many ways, he doesn't even need a full character arc, because him showing up in a situation being like, I'm normal, this is strange, what do I do, is what the audience is thinking. And so he helps us work through that too. And, Leia, does she have a character arc? I wouldn't really say she has a big character arc in A New Hope. Over the trilogy, I believe she does. She literally goes from, a senator, princess in white, all the way down to a like guerrilla fighting, soldier in, naturalistic colored camouflage, on the ground in nature with the other, common soldiers, fighting in a rebellion, and obviously she's part of her journey there is, she goes from princess to general to like almost just like foot soldier in a way. She's still like in charge, I believe, and so was Han Solo. And Han Solo's arc is obviously, a continuation of his first film arc. And well, his arc's pretty much done after the first film. Leia does go, as she ends up with the common soldiers on the ground, her, transition point is, falling in love with sort of common man in Han Solo in Empire Strikes Back. Either way, you don't necessarily need big, strong character arcs. and you can have a situation where, let's see, you also need more characters that aren't just Jedi, which is something I think the prequels sort of missed out on. But they're so focused on these Jedi characters, that makes sense for those movies. But you probably need something in the lines of, it's very good to have a sort of Han Solo-y character. And, I don't know, like you drop in like Julia Roberts as a Han Solo in 1986 or something like that, or a sort of a more mercenary type or something, or a wheeler dealer, or that they're always working with, is an interesting idea. And are you just gonna? There are certain archetypes in Star Wars that are very clear and very common, and if you bring them in again, are you just gonna repeat those character arcs again? You can have an adventure where characters you like go through something and overcome it. They figure it out. They have setbacks, but they do triumph in the end, and they don't have to have changed. Not all stories have to be character arcs. It can just be, like you watch the Super Bowl, and it's not really about character arcs, but it is very entertaining, very dramatic, very emotional, and you can see it on the players' faces and the coaches' faces and the fans. And do they leave that having changed? Was there a beginning, middle, and end? A first quarter, halftime, fourth quarter to the character arc of them in that story of that game? No. So you don't necessarily have to have it. And, you can also work on that over the course of, I guess, a sort of a new trilogy. If this is what Star Wars 86, 89, and 92 would be. And it is, anyway, there's a lot there to work with. Maybe we'll return to this subject. We're about to reach an hour, which is like 3 times longer than the previous podcasts here. And it's pretty fascinating. It's not an easy thing to come up with. But I think you have enough to make a treatment. You do need a more clear villain, which would probably be some Imperial warlord. And you probably need, I guess they could be conquering a planet the New Republic wants, but it's got like that planet has a crime lord on it, and so you're trying to vie for this crime lord to ally with you or not the Empire. And this is getting somewhere. And, you're trying to battle. They're the sort of Han Solo of the movie. Maybe they're the Julia Roberts. This crime lord planetary ruler who, the Imperial Remnant wants, the New Republic wants, and you're trying to, and the Jedi are stuck in the middle, trying to do what is right and what the Force wants. And that maybe end up, it may end up with the planet being independent or something like that. And who knows? And that would bother both sides, and there'd be a conflict, and you defeat the Empire, and then, twist, the planet doesn't want to join the New Republic, they want to stay independent, and et cetera, et cetera. And the sort of battle for the soul of this sort of half crime lord, half planetary ruler person, as they are in between or in the middle of the triangle between the New Republic, the Imperial Remnant, and the Jedi, and Luke, etc., is maybe where you build out your entire sort of story arc for the entire plot of the movie, and where you build these sort of a character and action set piece, warlike climax. That seems okay for one movie, Star Wars 1986. It's something. I mean, what's your pod race? What's your Death Star trench? What's the actual set pieces? Those are generally George Lucas specialties and not special editions. Ha. Those are George Lucas specialties. And, he'd often take those from other movies that were a lot of fun. I mean, the Death Star trench run is reminiscent to, I believe, like the Dam Busters, etc. Grand Prix is one of the, I think, a racing movie he is actually operating like a camera operator on, and is reminiscent of the pod race, and so are other things, Ben-Hur. So the set pieces you can work out, and I don't think you need a Dark Jedi in the first film, though. I mean, maybe you have, if you're going to do a Dark Jedi, I think you'd only have 2 at most in the 6 movies of Lucas, right? And he kind of fudges that in the Clone Wars, but they're always like, but it's going to end up at 2. There's this rule of 2. It's going to be at 2. Don't worry, it'll be 2. We'll get there. In the Clone Wars show, I think a Dark Jedi Order, if the first one were like Star Wars, the New Jedi Order or something, and the second one were like Star Wars, the Dark Jedi. Well, I don't know. I don't know what New Jedi Order sounds. It doesn't quite, I think, do that. So, Star Wars, the New Age, like more Star Wars, the Star Wars. Anyway, whatever you'd call it, I think a Dark Jedi Order and school that maybe even one of those, maybe some Han and Leia's kids go to undercover in the second film would be interesting. And then you have, I guess, a real sort of battle for the fate of the Force between a new Jedi Order and this new Dark Jedi Order in the third movie. And that sounds, that sounds compelling. That's kind of, I would I would pay for those tickets and I would line up to see that movie. But I think we have enough for the skeleton of a Star Wars 1986, given everything that's left behind from 1983's Return of the Jedi, everything we know about the potential George Lucas sequel trilogy treatments in the Disney sale. And I think it's interesting stuff to work with. And I think we've improv'd enough of a story for today. So you all have a great week. It's been fun. I'm on the internet as Throwaway Lines, and I'll not see you later, but I will talk at you later through your speakers. All right. You have a great time. Bye.